And this is Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. John Duggan with you 3 to 5. You can text us 53106. We're streaming the conversation as well. You can listen on News Talk across the country, but also watch us if you'd like on the Off the Ball digital and social channels on YouTube, Facebook, the OTB Sports app, and on Twitter. Ulster, by the way, 31-19 ahead against the Sharks in the United Rugby Championship. This is the panel. This week we're discussing the hot topics in sport right now with the former All-Ireland winner with the Camogie team of Cork and the ex-Dublin Camogie and Cork City player Sarah O'Donovan and the Irish independent sports writer Conor McKeon. Sarah and Conor, you're both very welcome to the studio.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Good to see you both. And we're going to start with the big show that's kicking off at 2:50 in Ireland, Italy, in the Six Nations in Rome. We're looking for 3 out of 3. We should win. If we don't win, it'd be an absolute disaster, wouldn't it? Like, it can be clearly argued, I think, Conor, that we're the number one team in the world. We're the top ranked team. We beat the world champions in Africa last year. We've just beaten the Grand Slam champions in France. We beat New Zealand down on a tour last year. Andy Farrell's team seem to have a huge degree of depth. So whether we win the Six Nations or not, there's going to be a huge degree of expectation around the World Cup leading into that. And it just seems that everything at the moment is building towards this massive crescendo later in the year. It'll be something for us to manage, not only Scotland and England ahead, but then what's come to come beyond that, you know?
Yeah, well, I'd be very interested to get a handle on how they plan to address that, because as you said, like, if Ireland do win the Six Nations in a Rugby World Cup year, not only does the expectation level, I think, ramp up to a very high level, I think a lot of the echoes of what happened in the World Cup in the past coloured the conversation, and that becomes an issue too. And I'm interested that Gary Keegan is the performance coach with the Irish rugby team. I read an interview with Gary Keegan a few years ago with Dennis Walsh, where he discussed his work with the Dublin football team between 2015 and 19, and he spoke about how they addressed the 5 in a row at the start of 2019. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, you know, the best teams are the ones that problem solve the most efficiently. That's the nature of elite level sport. You're constantly problem solving, and to do that, what you first have to do is accept the problem and address the problem. You don't ignore the elephant in the room. You kind of go in and tug it by its tail. And he said that they just addressed it very early in the year and said, right, like, what is this? It's expectation. It's history. What does that look like? How does that manifest itself? Where will we experience that? How might it affect our focus on what we're actually trying to do? And I would just imagine that if Gary Keegan is working with the Irish rugby team, and he is in the same role, if Ireland win the Six Nations this year, and even if they don't, because, you know, the France victory, I think, has probably sustained that level of expectation from the New Zealand and the South Africa wins. But I think they'll address that pretty soon afterwards, because it's a long lead into the World Cup. There will be very little to talk about from an international rugby point of view between the end of the Six Nations and the start of the World Cup, and that will be filled very much with talk that Ireland could possibly win it.
So, to the uninitiated, people who don't know, he was involved in Irish boxing for years.
Yeah, he was the high performance director with Irish boxing. Tends not to attract a whole lot of attention to himself. You know, I think very few people would have known that he was with the Dublin footballers for those 5 years, but he was with Tipperary hurlers before that when they won a Hurling All-Ireland. He's with the Cork hurlers, I think, in 2 different stages as well.
Is he a mind guy?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would scoff at the idea of performance coach, but it's only a kind of an adaptation or a broadening of the role of team psychologists, you know. And I think that becomes very important when you're trying to do something like win multiple All-Irelands or win a World Cup. You know, you tend to find when you're, just as a journalist, when you speak to teams that are very successful, when you speak to different players, you kind of get a sense that they all have a very collective mindset, you know. Like, in as much as everybody in a panel or a squad can be feeling the same thing at the same time is impossible. Some will have more confidence than others, some will be in better form, some will be, you know, disenfranchised, some won't. But everybody will have a sense of, you know, what are we here to do? How are we going to do it? What are the things that might be able to distract us? What are the things that we don't do? And it's the most overused word, I think, in sports analysis at the moment. But that culture, you know, the behaviours that happen automatically, I think that's something that somebody like Gary Keegan will be very proactive about implementing in that squad.
7 changes for the game. Gary Ringrose the latest to go. But there is almost an atmosphere of so what about this with the Irish rugby management and coaches. Like, we just have to deal with it and deal with that, as Conor said, positively.
I agree. I think the game is probably a game that everyone's looking to get over and through without any injuries. From I suppose those who travelled, there seems to be great atmosphere over there. Both RTE and, you know, Off the Ball have sent people over, and it's kind of one of those games that you're looking at depth, aren't you? You're looking at players who are getting opportunities to come in, and you're looking to see, can we get through, I suppose, without making many mistakes. I think an overall performance, and key point here is Ross Byrne, isn't it?
Yes.
I think that's...
Is there too much put in the number 10? Is it because of Johnny is so pivotal and because of Raj before him was the key man, or is it just simply because it's the most important position on the pitch?
I think it's the most important position on the pitch. And if you look at last night, the under-20s, Sam Prendergast, 7 conversions, stunning performance, man of the match. And I think it was Fiona Coughlin was speaking afterwards saying, inevitably if your number 10 plays well, he gets the player of the match, because that is the most important position on the pitch. So it's pivotal. That's the one you look at.
The mind then and the performance coaches, were there people in Cork and in Dublin or people you've seen along the way that have done this right?
Yes, I agree with the idea of a performance coach from both the player level and a management level, because sometimes there's things, and that confidence piece that you're talking about, different players are at different levels in terms of their confidence at different stages in the season. I don't not want to necessarily tell the manager that I'm not feeling it, but I would be comfortable telling a performance coach, I'm not feeling great today. And they'll have a conversation in the background, and you can go out and give a different kind of perception of yourself on the pitch, and you can have an outlet where you can be vulnerable. And I imagine in that Dublin team that you're talking about, that incredibly successful Dublin team, and you had people like Owen O'Gara, Paddy Andrews, these players who were looking to try and break in, they needed an outlet. And Kevin McMenamin, no more than anyone, has been very vocal about his, I suppose, turn with the team, and actually has gone into that environment since and is involved with the boxing, with Irish boxing in the last number of years. Those players needed an outlet, and it wasn't going to be Jim Gavin that you were telling that you were feeling a little vulnerable. So certainly I think there's a place for it in high level sport now.
Very good. So we're expecting a straightforward win today.
I think so, yeah. When the fixtures come out, you nearly kind of look at it as there wasn't a huge buzz building up to this game this week, there's no great expectation. That doesn't happen with the fixtures against Italy, because there's an assumption, I think, that Ireland are going to win.
It's almost more reflective of when things are bad. So Declan Kidney, really, it was all over when we lost to Italy 10 years ago in Rome. That was it then.
Yeah, but people have to remember, Italy beat Australia last year.
Wales.
They've beaten Wales as well within the last little while. And I think it's one of those cycles with Italian rugby, for whatever reason, that just when the national team reach that point where there's a natural debate about their participation in the Six Nations, they tend to come up with one of these big wins from nowhere. But I think it would be a massive shock if it happened.
You have
today.
to admire them, though. That under-20 Italy team have lost 3 from 3 last night, but they were playing like they really, really wanted it. So you have to admire players in that situation who were pushing to keep it, I suppose, to keep themselves in the Six Nations across those 2 age groups.
So we have that at 2:15. We'll keep you right up to speed, folks, on what's happening as it unfolds. Many things to talk about, including, I think this was a very interesting story. Explain what's happening, Conor, with the Kamogi All-Stars being held in Canada in May, just before the championship starts.
So it was only officially announced, I think, not Friday gone, the Friday before, by the Camogie Association, that I think this is the first Camogie All-Stars tour since the lockdown, and it's the third Camogie tour that has All-Stars tour that has happened ever, and the previous 2 were in November, and this year's one is going to be between May 19th and May 25th, and it's going to be to Calgary in Canada. But the provincial championships start the following week, and 7 of the Cork players, the 7 Cork players who would have been due to travel, all withdrew their services. This was confirmed by Aisling Thompson during the week. And the point that Aisling Thompson made was that, the reason that those players got All-Stars is because they have teammates around them. And for them to take a week off the week before the championship starts is doing a disservice to their teammates. Now, I spoke to people kind of on all sides just chasing the story during the week. And
so the Camogie Association, obviously not in the studio today. What is their thinking? Because it doesn't seem to be very rational to the outside observer.
Well, so the reasons that a spokesperson gave to me was, first of all, that I suppose the nub of this really is that the players weren't consulted about the dates. They were told about the dates. And I think if they had been consulted about the dates, and the GPA weren't consulted either, who would have been a representative of the players in this situation, you'd imagine that there would have been a certain amount of pushback. But it seems that the Camogie Association went and put together the logistics of this trip and then informed the players as to when it would be on. But given the proximity of the trip to the first round of the championship, you would imagine that any organisation would at least consult the players before telling them that it was on. Now the Camogie Association is saying that the plans are already in place. There are teams that are travelling up from America to play in a tournament the day before. It's more than just a single match. It's a whole kind of festival of camogie in and around that time. That because of the split season, they didn't want to interrupt the club season by having it in November, and that November wouldn't be a very good time of year to have a camogie exhibition match in Canada anyway. But in all of this, it's the lack of consultation with players, which is the thing that strikes you the most. And as Sarah pointed out, this comes very, very quickly on the heels of the recent controversy for the final of the Ashbourne Cup, where one of the colleges, UL, had one game left to play in their group. They needed to overcome a massive scoring difference. I think it was 34 points. They rang the third level Camogie Association just to clarify exactly how many points they needed, because on the published tables they calculated that they need 34 points. Remarkably, they won by 35 points to qualify for the semi-finals, and were then informed, I think 2 days before the semi-finals, that in fact they'd been given the wrong total that they needed to overhaul, and they needed to win by 38, and were thrown out of the Ashbourne Cup. Now, like, that's at the elite level of third level camogie, and that's a failure somewhere along the line. And they weren't, like, the third level. This is my understanding, Sarah. You can jump in anywhere here, just correct me. But when the appeal came to the Camogie Association, or to the third level Camogie Association, they basically kicked it up to the hearings committee of the overall Camogie Association. So straight away it's on the desk of the Camogie Association, and the way that they handled it definitely wasn't to any sort of fairness to UL. So I think between these two stories, and when something like this happens, we always link it back to, well, what would happen if it was the GAA and this was men's inter-county teams, or this was Fitzgibbon Cup.
But if there was an umbrella organisation, would be any better?
Well, I think that's the point.
The issue here is that the sponsorship aspects of the Camogie Association have gone under the GAA umbrella in the last year. So the Camogie Association are getting more sponsorship opportunities. They've just announced a big one with Alliance, because they've gone in under the guise of the GAA. I think from the point of view of the players and the management of the teams that are involved this year, it was simply a non-runner that you would consider that a week before your championships commence, a plane load of the best players in the country are heading off on a Figari to Canada. And which they deserve, by the way. Absolutely deserve it. But that's
the frustrating thing, because you want to have that. You want to have that for once in a lifetime, maybe, chance to go away. And
I think that once in a lifetime chance has changed now. The likes of Amy O'Connor, who's the Cork captain, went travelling last year, and this is only Instagram, but she was in America, she was in Miami. These players are choosing to travel at times in the year where it's not impacting their performance. These are players whose nutrition is on point for 10 to 12, 15 weeks before a championship season commences. They have sleep trackers. They have load management. These are all things that they've planned out since the previous November, December, January.
And because you're coaching in this sphere.
Exactly. And for the Camogie Association to assume that these players would be able to plug out of their championship preparations for 1 week, go to another country, it's 8 hours flight away, and then plug back in and perform a week later is incredibly naive at a very base level. I just find it bonkers. And what's disappointing is, and it's something that I heard a couple of weeks ago, the Munster Championship, the men's Munster Championship, is obviously one of the pinnacle championships in the country, and has massive spectatorship, and we've got genuine, I suppose, interest in it. And the Camogie Championship, the Munster Camogie Championship, was being given an opportunity to go in as a double header under the men's championship games. Increased spectators, good atmospheres, and it's falling in the same 2 weeks as the Camogie are supposed to go to Canada, so it became a non-runner. Now, if you ask me, would Aisling Thompson, Amy O'Connor, Laura Tracy, all of these girls who are supposed to go on a plane to Canada, would they prefer to be playing in Thurles in Semple Stadium, against Limerick, an hour before Cork play Limerick in the Munster Championship? 100%. that was the opportunity that they've missed because the Camogie have gone on this tangent.
These issues, would they be more easily solved? And it is Tom Ryan's ambition, and Mary McAleese has got a task force going to have the amalgamation of the associations. Would these things be ironed out on a smoother level, do you think, if we had a central leadership? But because we had a month of Kilmacud Glen at the start of the year in the men's game, it just seems to me there's issues in GAA, there's issues in all sports, but is there a way of getting a better process around these issues so they don't keep arising, and in a year's time we'd be talking about some other controversy?
Well, I'm not sure that this particular controversy would have happened if they were under the same umbrella. My sense of it is that players in the GAA, inter-county players in the GAA, have a far greater standing within their organisation than Camogie players do with the Camogie Association. That would be my read of it.
That would be a very fair assumption right now, based on the last month and a half in Camogie. Yeah.
Yeah, you would imagine that players have not. I wouldn't say that they've leveraged their power, but like through the strikes and all the fallout and all the things that had to happen, all the the little forest fires that had to happen 15 years ago. I think we're in a much better place for that, and there tends to be a high level of consultation between the GAA and the GPA when these things happen, and the GPA serves a very good function there. It means that the forest fires and the friction can happen between a representative players' body and an organising committee without the players really having to fight on the front line, if you want to put it that way. But on this occasion, quite simply, the GPA were not consulted, and neither were any of the players.
Because the women's GPA are now in with the
yes, GPA. And you have people like Conor Myler, communicating during the week that he thinks this is ludicrous, and he's looking at it from the point of view of an inter-county player, and he's seeing women and men in the same sphere and looking at the same championships, and that's where the consultation needed to happen, John.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out though as well, like last week, or was it the week before, we had instances of players in Armagh being vocal about the fact that they hadn't received any expenses for the first 3 or was it 4 months since they went back training in November, and it was the middle of February, and they hadn't. So it's not as if everything at GAA in the men's game it runs particularly smoothly. They do hit speed bumps along the way, but this seems to be particularly sort of gregarious.
Yeah, I would be surprised if the other counties don't row in now. I can't see Kilkenny going to the All-Stars in Canada if Cork don't go. I think it's a statement of intent.
Which would be an embarrassing situation.
It would, and the commercial aspect of the men's side is, I don't think a sponsor would send a plane to Canada if the best players weren't on it.
I'm interested, not completely related, but Jarlath Burns is going to be the new president of the GAA, Conor. What does he need to impactfully do when he gets that role? Because I've seen certain columnists and journalists arguing that there might be a bit of a leadership deficit in the association at the moment.
It's a very, very complex question, Sean, because like the people talk about a leadership deficit, but if anything in the GAA, you actually have too many leaders. Recently when they published the annual reports in Croke Park, and the GAA leadership were sitting side by side, and naturally enough the Glen Crokes issue was put to them. They were very vehement. Tom Ryan was very vehement. Larry McCarthy was very vehement as well. And they said, look, the way the GAA is built, every issue will fall on the desk of a particular committee, because that is the process by which it is handled. And they couldn't really oversee their powers. They couldn't supersede their own powers by saying, okay, well, this one is an All-Ireland final, and so we have to swoop in and overrule everybody and make a grand
CEO
decision.
style.
Yeah, CEO style. That's just not what is done in the GAA. Now, I understand when something like that happens, there's an argument that there should be a sort of highest power with the ability and the facility to discard the rule book and use cop on and come to a decision that most people would find to be the right one. But the problem is in the GAA, you leave yourself open to having that decision appealed, a hearing, the DRA, everything else. So in situations like this, the GAA do have to do everything by the book. They can only defer to the committee that has the authority to deal with whatever that situation is. And in the GAA's case, it was the CCC. And the CCC said that in this situation where the referee's report was filed and the result was put into officialdom, it would take an appeal from the losing team. Now, not many of us agreed with that. We thought that Glen were being put in a very difficult position. But that is how that's how that process kind of kicks on to the next level.
I'm just getting from all this is a much more complex organisation than it maybe should be.
Yeah, it probably is. That's probably fair enough. And even the question on Jarlath Burns, I remember when Nicky Brennan was president. I'm not sure how long ago that was now.
Mid-noughties, yeah.
Mid-noughties. But Nicky had this, I won't say a dream, but definitely he had this idea that the role of the GA president should be far more of a figurehead one than a policy driver. And I saw a lot of sense in that, because to have somebody to come in who has all these notional powers, because they do appoint all the committees, like the chairman of the CCC currently sitting has been appointed by Larry McCarthy, etc., etc. But to have that on a rotation basis every 3 years doesn't make any sense, because any good policy is going to be more than 3 years in duration. So if John Duggan is the president of the GAA and he does something for 3 years, and then I
didn't know, but thanks. Yeah, so
you're the Uachtaráin Tuffa, and then Sarah takes over in 3 years' time and thinks everything you did is wrong. You kind of tend to go around in circles. So the question of what Jarlath Burns needs to do, I don't really know. The really interesting one for me is what he said about the border poll. The GA had to take a strong position on that it was incumbent on civic organisations in this country that in the event of a border poll they will have to take that. I think that is a very interesting thing for a GA president to come out with, because it would be going against the GAA's position by its own insistence that it's an apolitical organisation in these sort of matters. So it would be very interesting. Like Martin Brehney, who knows far more about these things than probably anybody, said during the week that the year of a lead-in, which if people don't know, when you're elected to be GA president, you have a year before you start the job. So Jarlath Burns will start out in a year's time. He reckons that that's nearly more important than the term itself. You're nearly kind of teeing up the work that you're going to do there. But specifically what that is, I still don't really know.
Just before we go to the break, the state of the nation around the teams in the leagues at the moment. We'll talk about the ladies football and Camogie League after the break, Sarah. But Roscommon, Conor, seems to be the team that are maybe surprising a few people at the moment.
Yeah, they did this a few years ago in 2016 and set off, and I think they finished third in 2016, and I think kind of the season caught up on them a small bit. They had started off a little bit faster than everyone else. There might be something similar in that as well, but like they're a very good team with a lot of good forwards, which is like Davy Burke has, I think, probably a variety of forwards that a lot of inter-county managers would really like to have. They have players who can run, they have players who can score from distance, they have players who are good sitting in the pocket, and they've got goal scorers as well. And he seems
there's going to be a connection between what they do, say, if they get to a league final or win a league, and the championship. But given the nature now that everything is finished by July, do you have to be in a space of momentum now more earlier in the year?
I think it depends on the county. I think we'll look back on this league, and I think what teams are doing now will be only able to figure out when we see what comes into the championship. But you have to remember for Roscommon, so for each of the last 7 years they've either been promoted or relegated. So staying in Division 1 is a big thing for Roscommon. But equally, they're on the same side of the draw in Connacht as Mayo and Galway. That's a very top-heavy provincial draw. So whatever way they finish the league, they will more than likely start in the championship. And however they start in the championship in that first game will define their entire season.
Are the Dubs using their Division 2 run well? Jack McCaffrey's back?
Are they using it well? They're trying a lot of players, which they probably wouldn't have had a great chance to do in Division 1. Maybe they would have done it anyway. But the big issue in Dublin is that the players that are coming through are good squad players, that they're kind of filling in some of the gaps, maybe on the bench. But in terms of breakthrough onto the starting 15, it's, like the big developments for this year with Dublin are Jack McCaffrey and Paul Mannion coming back. I think for Dublin, they're nearly postponing the future as long as they can, because if the three of us were to pick a Dublin 15 now, it would look All-Ireland worthy. But I think if we were to take 3 or 4 players,
there's a touch of the one last hurrah, Pat Gilroy back in the backroom team. There's a touch of we'll meet Kerry again, we'll beat them, and that'll be it.
My issue the last day with the Cork game was Cork would have won that game if Jack hadn't been introduced, if James hadn't been introduced. Would it not have been incumbent on Desi to hold them back and see can the guys he's trying to develop get them over the line? you are obviously, putting off the inevitable.
Yeah, and even if you look, like if you were to put together a list of the players who have left the Dublin panel since 2020 and a list of players who've come in to replace them, and we were to, put together a kind of a quality assessment, there's no doubt that the panel has gone down like that, but they're coming down from a pretty high base, and it's just a question of where they are at the moment. Is that going to be good enough to get them over the line?
We are on the Saturday panel with Conor McKeon and Sarah O'Donovan. If you want to text us and anything, you can on 53106. Just going to go to the break. Just let you know, by the way, folks, in the championship, it is Coventry 1, Sunderland 0. That is the latest score. So that match is into the second half. Ulster have beaten the Sharks 31 points to 24. Harry Sheridan with the latest try there. So Ulster winning by 7 points down in South Africa. And plenty of matches in the Premier League kicking off at 3 o'clock. Everton, Aston Villa, Leeds, Southampton, Leicester, Arsenal, West Ham, Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth, Manchester City is a 5:30 start, and then Liverpool away to Crystal Palace at 7:45. Plenty to talk about between now and 2:30. We'll do that on the Saturday panel after this. Is Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. John Duggan with you 3 to 5. You can text us 53106, tweet us at Off the Ball. Remember, folks, Braeburn Coffee is the official coffee partner of OTB. Braeburn Coffee is the first to offer self-serve iced coffee on the go with dairy and non-dairy milk options. Try Braeburn at Apple Green today. We're all over the Six Nations, Italy and Ireland, 2:15 start, and Rome will have everything up to date for you as we go through the afternoon. This is part 2 of the Saturday panel discussing the hot topics in sport right now with the former All-Ireland winner with the Camogie team and ex-Dublin Camogie and Cork City player Sarah O'Donovan and the Irish independent sports writer Conor McKeon. If you want to text us and anything you can on 53106. We were just before the break talking about GA counties, the state of the nation in terms of where everybody is in the league at the moment. Kerry, Conor, the All-Ireland champions, the league obviously not the priority, we know that, but can they hit the ground running now, running into the spring? Are you seeing anybody coming through?
No, I think that's I don't think their performances or their results in the first couple of weeks will make any odds to Jack O'Connor. It was well flagged that they weren't going to be tearing up trees at this time of year. That's exactly what you'd expect. I think they came home from holiday the week before that Cork game in the Munster League, so there was literally no chance of anybody putting on a decent show. But I think the worry is for them, what you're looking for in an All-Ireland winning team is 3 or 4 people to come from nowhere, or not from nowhere, but from somewhere other than the winning team and put pressure on the players that are there. I think ideally a manager would like to have 2 or 3 new players in the team, if at all possible, just to kind of keep it fresh. And, like Pa Warren was there, he was taken off at half-time the last day. Micheál Burns, who's been kind of a good weapon off the bench for Kerry in the last few years, he got 2 starts and he was off the last day at half-time. So I think that the worry for Jack O'Connor would be if they keep going back to the same players over and over and over again. Like that team last year, it was like a perfect storm. That they set up well defensively, the age profile of the team, getting the season they did out of Clifford, all of those. But you tend to find that a team like that, they'll pick up 1 or 2 injuries. Somebody will lose form along the way. The way they defend, will teams put more pressure in certain areas after being able to analyse them that bit more? So that's the issue for Kerry, really, is that you do want to have 2 or 3 players that are making it look like they're going to force your hand a bit. And for Jack O'Connor, the players that are doing that are in the positions where it's very unlikely they're going to get into the team. You're not going to displace Sean O'Shea, you're not going to displace Paddy Clifford, and you're certainly not going to displace David Clifford. So yeah, they're the issues as I see them for Kerry, but I'm pretty sure that they won't be panicking just yet. Is there a bolter this year? Mayo have started well in the league. Galway got to the All-Ireland final last year. Armagh, Tyrone. Well, Armagh would be the team that I would consider to, if you consider them a bolter, I think there's huge potential there. I think they're great to watch. I think they're a really interesting team. It's not a huge leap to say they could have made a final last year. They're very close. They lost to Galway on penalties in the quarter-final, and they would have played Derry in a semi-final. Still hard to even hear that being described. I know, it's crazy, but to watch them play football, I think what's really interesting and admirable about them is there tends to be a bit of a copycat dynamic at the top level of inter-county football. What works for a particular team, you see it in a lot of other teams. But I don't think that's how this Armagh management work, and they kick the ball an awful lot more than other teams. You see that some of the scores that Ryan O'Neill kicks, they get the ball into him quickly and very, very early. And they also have, as far as I can see, the best use of that fly style goalkeeper, because you've seen it with other goalkeepers before, but there are times when Rory Began will come out of goal and he'll take a hand pass in the halfway line and give another hand pass and trick. But with Rafferty, he tends to come out when the play is about to slow down, where they've kind of hit an opposition wall, and then he comes out and he's free to get on the ball and he delivers it really quickly. So I think there's a lot to like about Armagh. They had issues with discipline last year. That was that one area where they're going to have to tighten up this year, because whatever anybody says, it's a massive drain. It's a massive drain on energy if you're going into the appeals process. It can be a drain on resources if you've got players who are missing 2 or 3 games with suspensions. But from a football point of view, and from a watchability point of view, I think Armagh are a really interesting team to watch.
All these new managers in hurling, Sarah, this year in the men's game: Pat Ryan, your own county Cork, Liam Cahill, Derek Ling, Davy Fitzgerald. How must they be feeling right now with what they've seen early doors, to use that football cliche, in the hurling league?
2 games down. Cork obviously going very well. Kilkenny will be the team that probably haven't found form yet. Interesting that the Fitzgibbon is now finished, so it'll be interesting to see this weekend what players will be introduced from all sides. We're looking for depth across the different teams. You saw Mikey Kiley score 4 goals the last day for UL. And for Waterford, he's been kind of used in fits and starts, so the managers actually haven't had their players, you know, uninterrupted for the last month and a half because of the fits. So this weekend, I know there's a couple of debuts for Cork. Ethan Toomey's in for Cork. A lot of changes for Cork as well. Pat Ryan has the advantage of having such depth in his squad that he's 40-45 players that he's going to get to see over the league. Kilkenny, I don't know if they have the same depth. And what I didn't like about Kilkenny last week was their first touch was awful. The basics, the things that I suppose were their mainstays under Brian Cody, were absent. They looked really nervous. They looked very different. And you can have off days, but you shouldn't be having an off day against Tip. They're the team that you look to, you know, set your barometer against. And that was my issue with Kilkenny last week, is with Tip is the team that they love to take on, and they looked so unlike themselves. From Limerick's point of view, their depth is just scary, absolutely scary. Shane O'Brien, the last day for Limerick, he's not even the size or makeup of the Limerick lads that are there currently, but he caused awful hassle. Adam English, stunning hurler, in the vein of Peter Casey, like really penetrative forward. In I suppose in Michael Houlihan, Barry Murphy pairing with Darragh O'Donovan. They've just got options coming from all sides. And where Conor was talking about, you know, Kerry and players, you know, pushing different players and not necessarily having players come through, I think in Limerick it's a completely different situation, because Kyle Hayes can play wing back, centre forward, he can play midfield. John Kiley has the advantage of being able to move his pivotal players around the field and bring in these guys who are showing form. Other teams don't have that luxury.
Yeah, I think Limerick are just, you know, like, they're incredibly good. You know, like I mean, it's sometimes like this whole thing about the regeneration of the team, that nearly wasn't part of the deal. You know, I think everybody in hurling was getting behind, going, okay, well, this is brilliant that a county like Limerick is having this kind of period of dominance.
But it will end because it's Limerick.
Yeah, but I think as well as that, people kind of console themselves by saying, well, anything they have coming through is through. But this is the first year now that this team has seen, like, there's the fair chance now that between last year's All-Ireland final and, say, for the sake of argument, this year's All-Ireland final, that the team will have changed significantly. Like, remember that, like, the last day, they absolutely hammered Clare. They didn't have Aaron Gallan. We don't know what the story is with Gallan. They didn't have Declan Hannon, who's the most decorated captain in the history of the game. They didn't have their hurler of the year. Like,
Barry Nash wasn't
there. So, like, they're in a place where people might talk about the Dublin footballers during that 5 in a row thing, but in all of those All-Irelands except for 2018, Dublin just about won. You know, the thing that defined that Dublin team was that in the big games against the teams that were almost as good as them, they produced the big plays in the big matches. But Limerick are wiping teams here. Like, I think they're further ahead of the pack now than Dublin ever were in football. And it's noticeable that in the 4 All-Ireland finals that they have played in the last 5 years, they've played 4 different teams. And had they, the year that they lost to Kilkenny, had they won that game, they would have played a 5th differently. They would have played Tip in the final that year. So, like, there's a load of jockeying position that's going on beneath them. But it's not like there's contender that's kind of building and getting closer and closer, and eventually will topple them, a bit like Tip did to the 4 in a row Kilkenny team. That was obvious that they were coming. The story of the kind of chasing pack in the last few years in hurling is somebody rises up and has a crack and then disappears off into the thing. And I think as we sit here, like, we can make a case for 5 or 6 teams to be the challenger this year, but I just can't see any of them actually coming up to where Limerick are.
Do you agree with that?
I do, based on the fact that
Cork's under eye success, Henry Shefflin, maybe a more physical team in Galway? No?
I think Cork are the one to watch just because they have every variety of forward.
Good manager.
But they have a good manager. But the big thing for me so far with Cork this year, and again it's only early days, is they have 2 players in Kieran Joyce and Owen Downey at 6 and 3 who've been incredibly good.
That's been their weakness in
you'd have to go back as far as nearly the Rock and Ronan Curran for the last time the Cork had those 2 pivotal positions nailed down. They've had a huge amount of rotation, like non-stop, that those positions. I think they will only be disappointed that Mark Coleman's not around this year, because he, like, alongside those 2 players that have a very, very serious defence. But like the last day against Galway, it was Decky Dalton and Conor Lahan that did the business. You know, against Limerick it was Horgan and Robbie O'Flynn. So like they have a lot going on for themselves up front. It's nearly deciding which alignment works best, but to have 3 and 6 nailed down, presuming that those 2 young players continue in that role this year, I think that they look the likeliest to kind of come up to where Limerick are. You were saying Galway earlier, and I can understand that one as well.
Yeah, I suppose physically.
They meet tomorrow, Galway, Limerick.
Yeah, it's just Galway physically are the only team that match Limerick size, size-wise. Cork are slowly plugging in lads who are, that 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", who can take them on. But Galway have been at that kind of physicality level. Like Garrod McInerney shouldered a fella the last day, and he, like, I suppose that's what I'm probably a little kind of worried about, that I don't know if Owen Downey has that presence that Garrod McInerney has right now, or will he have developed it by the start of the championship. I think that's asking a lot. If you look at pound for pound a full-back, Owen Downey versus Garrod McInerney, so that's where Galway are ahead.
Right, we're talking about the current state of the nation in sport with Sarah O'Donovan, the former Cork Dublin Camogie player and Cork City player, and Conor McKeon of the Irish Independent. Just on Camogie, it just seems to me there's 3 teams that dominate Camogie: Kilkenny, Cork and Galway. Is that healthy? Is that going to change? Well,
last weekend Tip beat Galway and Clare beat Kilkenny, which is great news for Camogie. I think from a development point of view, it comes down to the clubs, okay? And in Dublin, the club championships are competitive to a degree, but they're not competitive enough. The standard at club level isn't bringing on players quickly enough to develop players to an inter-county level. It has to happen, and the Camogie are responsible for this. The club setups have to improve their training. They have to improve the competition elements for players. And this comes into men's hurling as well, like in the likes of Laois, in the likes of Westmeath, in the likes of Carlow. The club championships have to improve to allow the players to become better players at an earlier age, so that they can become, I suppose, high performance players much more quickly and close that gap. That's what it boils down to.
It probably does need it though. Like, I don't know, I might have done, say, 7 of the last 9 Camogie finals, and like some pairing of the same 3 counties have been there. And you can see maybe even the ladies football last year with Donegal and Kerry and Armagh, and that sense you sort of need to shake things up. And that's maybe why the goodwill to Limerick is still going on, because I think if Kilkenny or Tipperary or Cork had be having the level of dominance, I think by now people would be well and truly sick of it. But we
were sick of Kilkenny's dominance to a degree.
But if you look at the ladies football and the upsurge in women's involvement in ladies football, it has brought on the individual clubs, it's brought on the club game, it's improved players incrementally, and now that's having...
How many teams realistically can win the ladies football All-Ireland this year?
I would say 4.
So we're talking Dublin, Cork, Meath and...
Galway.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Donegal are in there.
I wouldn't be surprised if Amy Mackin was around at Armagh. Like, so there's probably 6 or 7 teams that could make a final. Winning it might be a bit different, but it's hard to know, because with Dublin, we were just even speaking off air, there's been a huge changeover from the squad that won 4 in a row. From the Meath team, like, we don't know what the story is going to be with the couple of players who are away, and they've changed management, so you never know for certain either. So like, I wouldn't like to predict an All-Ireland.
No, and obviously, Kerry are flying it. So there's a much different base in ladies football.
Yeah, so it's Antrim 1 point, Fermanagh 1 point in Division 3 of the Allianz Football League. That is in Belfast in Cargan Park. We'll keep you up to date on the scores elsewhere as they go in. Remember, Ireland Italy is just about to kick off in Rome. Coventry won Sunderland 0 in the Championship. Liam Hayes, it's a very open, emotional at times interview, which is a must listen from Joe during the week. Joe Malloy, superb piece. Definitely worth your time, folks, on the OTB podcast network. So he had no interest in going to team reunions and wouldn't be close with his Meath teammates. Would this be unusual? Do we have this kind of romantic notion that the teams we follow, that they're all going to be mates forever?
Well, I think we do have these romantic notions. I think
it's like a band you like or something.
Yeah, it's like the teams that we love or that we relate to or that we connect with. We like to think that these players kind
of the Anton O'Toole, beautiful documentary there at Christmas.
Well, that's there. So it's a funny thing. That team, that Dublin team of the 70s, from all the teams that I've ever kind of looked into or read about, they seem to be the closest. Like there was a genuine brotherhood there among them. But you just wonder about it depends on how they interact while they're there. So that team had a big tradition with Kevin Heffernan where they had a shed in Parnell Park and they had these big long team meetings and people would air all the problems that they were having in their lives. And it wasn't just football related, it was to do with everything that was going on. And I think through that they became incredibly close. Where there were teams that they would have played against that wouldn't have had that same togetherness. Like they wouldn't necessarily be as close. Like I spoke to Stephen McNamara recently, who was involved in the Clare teams in 95 and 97, and it was just after they had been the Jubilee team for the 97. They'd missed the 95 one because of COVID, and I said it must have been great to get together. He says no, we get together all the time. The vast majority of that team are still very, very close, and you can imagine them being close because they were such a breakthrough team. Like they were so iconic. The thing that they came together to achieve was so intense. You'd imagine that it would kind of mould you all together. But there are other instances of teams that haven't been close at all.
Are you close to your former teammates?
Some. There was a few at the wedding. There was a few travelled to Italy. 2 of the Dublin girls. One girl that I played soccer with, Claudine, from 13 in Ballincollig, and one of my Cork Camogie teammates, Colette, was out there. But the different teams over the years, you tend to have pockets of friendships. And it's no more than being at school or in university. And there's colleagues in UCC and teammates in UCC that I'd still have great time for. But you can't carry everyone on the bus, And I think that's the issue, is that over the years, the longevity of your career, there's players that you stay in touch with and there's players that you just physically don't get to see anymore.
Yeah, I remember talking to somebody who played their football in the 90s and then was a member of a management team more recently. And he said the dynamic had changed a lot because in the 90s, when you got onto the county team that he played for, people were trying to see where you were tough enough for. So no matter where you were from, you were being slagged about where you were from. No matter what you did in your other spare time, you were being slagged for that too. And because of that, then cliques built up within the dressing room. Whereas now there's that would never happen, And it's all about respecting everyone and where they come from and everyone being aware of. And I think that probably promotes closeness. Maybe we'll see that teams that are around now will be a little bit closer in 20 years' time than the teams that 20 years ago are now.
It's interesting now with Vera Paw and the Irish setup, and she used to pick 26 players now going to Australia, and they've obviously created a culture within that group, and it's been formed by players who've been there since the very beginning, and the losses, and those players aren't going to be on the plane going to Australia. There's massive competition. They're going head to head. I don't know how they're going to maintain that closeness when it's literally going to be cutthroat and I'm going to be going at the expense of you.
I think when they get into the nitty-gritty though of the matches, a bit like Roy Keane leaving, you have to just move on and get to the game, and we're now playing the game, and if they win the first game,
I'm talking about, I suppose, the next 3 camps, and there's probably 35 players who are looking at being on the plane going to Australia, and you're very close to somebody, but you're in direct competition, especially the strikers. There's 5-6 of those players there who it'll boil down to whether I'm better than you. And when I was playing with Cork initially back in the early noughties, there was that sense that it wasn't about the culture. You didn't meet as often, so you were in direct competition with your teammates, and sometimes it didn't allow for close relationships because there was cliques and there was competition.
Yeah, I wonder as well, and this is a very sort of basic thing, but Intercounty players now do very little socialising. You know, that is it's part of being an intercounty player, but it's also a lifestyle thing that has changed with generations. And it's not as if players are going for, you know, they might have a couple of nights out, or maybe 1 or 2 team bonding nights that are all good, clean, organised fun. But once like, it's so intense being part of an intercounty environment.
Yes.
You tend to find that when their season ends, unless they win in All Ireland or something, the people are very quick to go back to where they're from. And I don't know, you know, having said earlier on that, you know, people might have more of a connection when they're together. I think without that social element to it, to the same degree as was there before, it's hard to know how they would kind of have that moment.
We've got about 2 minutes left. Ireland leading 5-0. We'll going over to Ashleen in Rome very shortly in the Six Nations. So Ross Byrne there missing the conversion. James Ryan with the try. We'll go over very shortly. Just before we go, I've never been to this Rome Italy game. The best ever away trip you've been on, Sarah?
Oh, the Derby, United and Man City, 2019. United won it 2-1. I was in the Man City end, so I was wearing not a red.
No celebrations?
No celebrations.
Okay, well, you have to change it. You've got back to the Stretford end now in the future. And yourself, Conor?
Well, mine is not. Mine is in 2002. My dad's a Newcastle fan, and myself and my brother are Arsenal fans, and we went to St James's Park. And we're behind the goal when Dennis Bergkamp scored a goal. There was just a flurry of feet and movement, and there was no screen in St James's Park, and nobody had videos on their phones, so nobody had a clue what had happened. And it was only after we'd gone out after the match and we were in a chipper and Match of the Day had been on, and somebody said, "Were you at the game today? You saw the greatest goal in the history of the Premier League." And 6 hours later, we hadn't a clue what had happened. So I'm putting that down because I saw one of the greatest goals of all time right in front of me, but we didn't know it until we got home and watched it on the telly.
Conor McKeon of the Irish Independent and Sarah O'Donovan, the former Camogie player from Cork, Dublin, and ex-Cork City player. Thank you so much for coming on the Saturday panel and lending your wisdom this afternoon. This is Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. Let's go to Rome. Ireland against Italy in the Six Nations. What's happening? Ashleen O'Reilly.
Yes, John, 5 minutes gone. It's Italy 0, Ireland 5. An exciting start for Ireland. Exactly what we wanted. We thought it was James Lowe who got over after 1 minute and 30 seconds. It was Bundy to Van der Fleer to Keenan to James Lowe, but he just dropped the ball before he grounded it, so it was deemed not a try. A minute later, James Lowe to James Ryan, and he easily got over. And once again, it was Bundy Aki with a great pass out of the tackle. It was Ross Byrne that missed the conversion, but not the easiest of conversions. A great crowd here, great atmosphere. 5 minutes, 30 seconds gone. It's Italy 0, Ireland 5.
Thanks so much, Ashleen, for the moment. The Ladies National Football League Division 1, sponsored by Lidl. Kerry 1-5, Meath 3 points in Brosna. And in the Camogie League Division 1A, Dublin 2 points, Tipperary 6 points. In Division 3 of the Football League, Antrim 3 points, Fermanagh 4 points in Belfast. We're back after the break paying tribute to John Motson with Mark Lawrenson.